I'd love to start with an overarching question. Starting with the big picture here, was finance someplace you always saw yourself?
It's interesting. You know, it's such a great question because early on in my career, really as a student, I always aspired to be a dancer. And I love the arts. It's what I thought I was going to pursue and study following high school. And I took a turn, a 180, after meeting my father at almost 17 years old. He was an entrepreneur. I had met him for the first time, and he was in business and pretty much restarted, rebounded after he got to the US from Cuba. And he's the one that convinced me to think about finance and maybe minor in dance. And after many conversations, he won me over. And so I decided to pursue a degree in finance. And then I went on to get my MBA, also as a result of a lot of influencing from him, for which I'm extremely grateful.
It's so important. I think parents have such a significant impact in our decisions sometimes, which is great. So I guess a little bit to, you've already alluded a bit to your father having an impact in your career choice. So what other things had an influence in your career path?
Parents, you know, you just talked about parents. I think family, and especially for Latinos, we have such a strong family foundation. And in my case, I had a very small nuclear family because when my mom left Cuba with the three of us, we lived in Spain for a couple of years, ended up in the US. At the time, everyone thought we'd be back in Cuba in no time, and that didn't play out. And then I met my father, again, when I was almost 17. He unfortunately had to serve a prison term in Cuba for almost 15 years. And so the family was split up. And, but, you know, the interesting thing is, even though it was a single mom with three children in a new country starting over, there was still this very strong tie to the broader family, to my grandmother in Cuba, to my father, who I didn't spend time with, you know, again, until I was a teenager. And it was all through the values. You know, I always say the values that your family instills in you, this immense sense of responsibility to stay connected, to honor your heritage. And all of that just comes through in everything you do. And so, you know, very strong work ethic. We were bilingual, so we only spoke Spanish at home. And we saw this amazing woman, you know, single mother of three, work multiple jobs, work nights, to really push through, all with an eye on education, and make sure that we all knew a work ethic and an education with a very creative and entrepreneurial spirit would carry us through.
That's amazing. As a fellow Latina, but also someone who was raised by a single mom, also have two siblings. I can also say that I think the work ethic that I saw from my mom has impacted my life tremendously as well. And she, you know, encouraged me to go far beyond what she was capable of doing when she first got here as well. We're from Puerto Rico, so
Yes.
that's awesome. So I guess my next question, which really ties into kind of the impressive career path you carved for yourself, can you tell me how you did that? And then to follow up, tell me a little bit about your current role at Morgan Stanley.
Sure. So, you know, I usually get the question of, you know, what did you know you wanted to do? What was your strategy? And I always say it's okay to not know and not have everything figured out. In fact, I would say, especially for women, we tend to overanalyze and make sure we have everything in order before we jump in. And so having been raised by a woman that really had to pivot, be very nimble, learn how to ask and build a very strong network to help her family be able to push through, I honed in on those skills at a very young age, and that's helped me throughout my career. And so what I would say first and foremost is risk-taking. You know, when I moved to New York from Miami, my mother wasn't happy about it. She told me I wouldn't be coming back. And again, just that very strong family foundation, just pulling me in to say, are you sure you want to do this? My father, on the other hand, was pushing me to do it. And I said, you know what, I'm going to go try this out for about a year. My husband, Chaz, is in the arts. He's an actor, producer, and a writer, and he had an agent in New York. And so we decided to go, and I said, a year, not a day longer. And we ended up staying almost 15 years. And so when I got to New York, I didn't have contacts. I didn't have a network. I had been working in real estate sales while I was pursuing my MBA. And so I was really starting over. And so this whole notion of taking a risk, and that's when I decided to break into private wealth, called many, many recruiters until a few took my call. And then as a result of that, I got in front of some heads of the businesses. And I finally landed my first job with Bank Boston in New York City. But it was through highlighting what I brought to the table. And none of it was experience in private wealth at the time. It was all about my passion for leadership, my passion and aspiration to manage, and the fact that I was going to work harder than anybody else in anything that I needed to do to be able to break through. And so risk taking, I feel, is really important as you embark on your aspirations, because it doesn't always work out, but if you stay the course and you connect with the right people, understand your vision, it pays off in the long run. So that's one. And then the other one is understanding and articulating your vision. I spent a lot of time talking to folks in the industry as I was building my network about what I aspired to do. I didn't know which job, I didn't know exactly which role, because I didn't grow up in this industry, I didn't grow up in this field, I didn't have folks in my household talking about that. So I didn't have a lot of exposure. So as I learned more, I topped up what my passion was. Culturally, I loved my culture. I wanted to work in international business. And so through those conversations, through those connections, that then propelled me to take on other opportunities at other firms. And then it just took off from there. And then finally, I would say being able to take on new challenges. I feel that Latinos, we're very entrepreneurial, we're very creative, we have that grit that carries us through because we lean in, we do it, and we do it over and over again. Because again, that struggle for me felt very comfortable. I'd had to fall down and pick myself up growing up as a child. So doing that in a professional setting felt very comfortable to me. And so that then put me on a path to take on new assignments. You know, if there was a startup business we were creating, a new strategy we were building, I'd always raise my hand for those and I'd go at it. And again, it was a whiteboard for me to figure out what I wanted to do, how to go at it. And sometimes that's a little bit unnerving because you don't have a rule set. You don't have what success looks like. You have to define it as you go along. And I developed a knack for that. And along the same lines, I was able to then build teams and bring people together to align to those strategies. And that's what I really enjoyed doing because I could bring very diverse talent to the table to help me think through those opportunities, to create a vision around what success looked like, and then put some goals that we could exceed along the way. And that has always motivated me to be able to do more, to want to do more, and to collaborate with many different people, bring them to the table to go get something new and big and keep our eye on the prize.
That's awesome. I love that idea of bringing people along. And I think, you know, one of the things I'd love to kind of talk about and just congratulate you on first and foremost is being a 3 times ALPFA top 50 most powerful Latinas in corporate America. And I think that is phenomenal. And I know that you were named the 2019 Makers at Morgan Stanley. How does it feel to be consistently recognized as an influential member of the community?
It's very humbling. It's a privilege. You know, earlier on in your career, you do everything that you do, not even realizing that you're going to be recognized for your efforts. And so again, what drives and fuels you is the work, it's the passion, it's the purpose and the drive that you have. And as you stay the course and you deliver results and folks take notice, you start to receive the accolades and the recognition for which you're extremely grateful because it's a gift. I say it's a gift every single day to have, number one, a platform at Morgan Stanley where I'm able to amplify the Latino voice and I'm able to amplify the female voice in helping the company advance the work that they're doing every single day in the businesses that we run with the employees that we bring together. all with an eye on diversity. And I always say when it's built into your DNA and it's what you do every day, the magic happens. And so it's been just remarkable. And I'm just really have a lot of gratitude for the recognition. On Friday at the Latitude conference, they announced the Most Powerful Latina list again for the 4th year. And I was named on that list again. And again, I reached out to the other women that were on the list, some of whom are being recognized for a second, third time in a row. And I would say that's also part of the benefit of receiving that recognition. It allows you to amplify your network. It allows you to connect with other women that are paving the way for that next generation that's coming behind us. And we can now scale our efforts. Being able to scale our efforts because we can collaborate cross-industry sector to do more and to have our voices heard so that, you know, that next generation, the students, the early professionals can look up and say, you know, I look like her, I think like her, that resonates for me, and I feel that I can have a place and I can have a career, in my case in wealth management, because we're doing a lot to get more Latinos and more women exposed to this industry that many have not had exposure to. And so there's huge benefit to doing that.
That's amazing. And I think you kind of pushed me into the next question I'd love to ask you. It's, you know, what, as Latina women, we don't necessarily fit the mold or the traditional model in some people's minds of what someone looks like in the finance industry. And my question for you is, one, what have been some of the biggest challenges? And I think most importantly, and I think something you've already started to talk about is, how has your background as a Latina influenced the work you do to help the community?
You know, when I started off in my career, I didn't go in thinking, will people look like me? Will they not? Like, I didn't have a construct under which I operated that put me at an advantage or a disadvantage, because you don't know what you don't know. So I went in very excited and energized to learn something new and to collaborate with folks on the work that I did. And so what I say is, you know, a lot of times we have to think about our differences as strengths, because too often we start to think immediately that because we're different, we're coming in with a disadvantage. I sort of turn that on its head and say, what is the advantage? What's the X factor by having somebody different at the table, by having somebody different in an industry? And that's really what's propelled me to come to the table with that attitude and that vision, to bring others along, to recognize the value. And so this sense of optimism, I'm an optimist, having a view that by leaning in and getting to know other people, building relationships, you're always going to find common ground. And so I'm a firm believer that by coming, whether you're entering a new industry, a new business unit, a team where you are different, understanding that when you build a relationship with somebody else, you break down those barriers, because you're going to find you have more in common. Whether it's the food you like to eat, or the school you went to, or you have, you know, an extended family, you just start to peel that back and you find commonality. And once you find that commonality, what's worked for me is then you hit it off and you find that you can work and collaborate around the objective and the goal. And professionally, early on in my career, I would say I really held that back. I didn't share my story. I didn't talk to folks about my background, the struggles, where I went to school. I was not open about that. You almost kept the two apart, you know, your professional life and your personal life. And what I've learned is integrating the two and bringing all of that together to bear in a very honest and candid way creates a lot of value, a lot of equity, and allows you to do more together, even with people that are very different to you. Have I been in a room where I've been the other, where I've been the only Latina, the only woman? Absolutely. Do you then start to sort of have the imposter syndrome where you say, well, do I belong? Should I be here? Sure. I think we all have those moments where we second guess what we're doing and how do others view us. But my mantra is make sure as you're coming in to the fold with any new group of people that number one, you get to know them. Lean in and get to know them, because that's going to allow you to connect in more meaningful ways ahead of the work that you need to do. And then number two, don't underestimate the value that you bring. And so it is about that X factor. It is about that difference that creates the value, and not the other way around.
I love that. It's so important. I think community, to your point, and then being authentic and bring your whole self to the things you do is so great. So my next question for you is, how have you seen the financial industry change for Latina women throughout your career?
It's changed a lot. It's changed a lot. I think for women overall, you know, when we think about the amount of wealth that's controlled by women in the US, right? You've got about 1/3 of US household assets, $10 trillion in the hands of women, soon to be 30 trillion. And the reality is, as that wealth is transitioning to more women, either because they're outliving their partners, because they're attaining higher education, greater income levels, for a multitude of reasons, you have women managing this enormous pool of wealth. And so the industry over the last 20 years has been thinking about, how do we have representation that reflects the clients that we service? And I think the same applies to Latinos as to women, which is making sure that you have employees that represent the clients that you're going after. Because if you don't do that, you're not going to remain relevant. So it is really a business imperative on why you need to do this, to make sure that you have women in this business, you have Latinas in this business that can take on positions of power, senior leadership roles, to really help you attract and retain the talent, and then also connect with your client base, because clients expect this. It's no longer a nice to have. They want to work with individuals that get them, that understand them, that are bicultural, because none of us are one-dimensional, I always say. And so having a very diverse team that faces off with the communities and the clients is what's expected. And so that's put things in motion across the industry to do so much more. And the opportunity for us is, how do we get this, how do we make this available to students? I always say, you know, the mission is to start earlier and to do it often, because again, if you haven't grown up in this industry, you don't have the exposure, you don't know. Why would you want to pursue a career, in my case in wealth management, if you don't know enough about it? And so getting into the schools where you have very diverse talent, and making sure that they understand what those opportunities are and how you can apply for internships and how you can learn about the business, I think puts people down a path to consider these roles. And that's in my mind so important, because otherwise at that point you're choosing your major, you're deciding what career you're going to take on. And so we're thinking a lot through our recruiting efforts at Morgan Stanley, how do we continue to scale our efforts to do that? And we, you know, within Latino community in the firm, we're always available to talk to students, to promote what we're doing, to help people understand what a career in this industry could mean for them. So it's, you know, it's an industry-wide effort. Every company is going at it, but I would say the face of the industry has changed. We need to do more. We need to move at a faster pace. But I always say it's the power of one. It's one individual talking to one student, to one early professional, to another woman, to share what that path has been like, to talk about possibilities that could get somebody interested to want to enter the field. And by the way, as women, I think this industry, we're very well positioned to do well in this industry. We think more broadly about creating value. We think about social impact. We like to collaborate and bring others together. And so I think this industry benefits greatly from having women participate. And it could be not just a very rewarding and fulfilling career because you help others, but it also gives you the flexibility you need as you're thinking about those trade-offs and integration between family and professional life.
So Ileana, can you tell me a little bit more about your role specifically at Morgan Stanley?
Sure, it's been such a privilege to join Morgan Stanley. It'll be 3 years and 2 weeks. So it's been an amazing run, and I'm just in awe at all of the amazing people I've been able to meet and connect with and continue to collaborate with. But I co-head the international wealth business. So it's those clients that live overseas outside of the United States that are looking at a firm like Morgan Stanley and that has an incredible reputation globally, a very strong brand, and a very talented group of financial advisors to cater to their needs. And as we know, many global families have ties to the US. You know, their children come to school in the US, they spend time in the US. And so we get to offer the best of both worlds by having a dedicated group of international advisors that helps them with every aspect of their financial lives. And I have the privilege of overseeing that segment. And then that goes hand in hand with the work that I have the opportunity to lead within the bank, bringing, you know, both the bank and our investment management to bear for our clients and thinking about the capabilities, the product set and the services, and bringing it together through a dedicated team that's thinking all day long about how to do that for global families. And so it's been an amazing run. I recently stepped in to co-chair our Latino Employee Network, and that's giving me an opportunity to collaborate across the organization, all divisions, with our enterprise-wide effort to not just mobilize our Latino talent, but attract more, and then think about how do we continue to cater to the needs of our Latino clients. And in doing both of those things, clearly impact the communities where we live, which is so important to our mission.
That's great. So I'd love to talk a little bit more about the Latino community. And so one of the questions I have is, why is it so important that the Latino community be represented appropriately in the financial services industry?
You know, the Latino Donor Collaborative puts out a report every year on the Latino GDP, and it's outstanding just to see the growth and the rate of growth by which the Latino cohort is driving and impacting the U.S. economy. And they just unveiled their latest report, which includes data through 2018, which shows that if the Latino cohort were measured as an economy, it would be the 8th largest in the world. But it's also the pace at which it's growing. So it's growing at such an accelerated rate that it's going to be impossible not to pay attention to it. And so I call it, sometimes it's a blind spot, because we don't realize that this is happening around us. And it's not just, by the way, foreign-born Latinos, which I think traditionally we've thought of, it's immigrants. It's really the next generation that's already born here, that are English speakers, that are digitally engaged. And by the way, the youngest cohort in the US. And so when we think about the labor force and how do we fuel the economy longer term, this is a cohort that's very, very important to future growth. And so companies like Morgan Stanley are paying attention to this. We know that this demographic is inherent in what we do every day, and we want to do our part. And so both from a talent acquisition and in terms of what we're doing with clients, it's really important to us. If we think about the next generation, you know, I believe Latinos, you've got about 1 million Latinos turning 18, okay, this year, and then every other year, I think, for over a decade. So think about that. You've got this very young demographic, and that for us means a couple of things. Number one, you've got folks coming into the labor force that we can help financially a lot sooner. Because when I think about financial empowerment and financial literacy, with the cohort that's starting to work, we can help them a lot sooner to have an impact. And so there's an immense responsibility. And when I think about our culture, there's some cultural norms that play into how do you feel about money and what's your relationship with money, and how do you talk that up at the dinner table so that your children are thinking about it in very positive and empowering ways. And that's not always the case, because if you've struggled you know, sometimes you don't know what to make of that as you start to acquire income. And I always say, you know, income isn't enough. You need to take that income, put it to work. You need to invest. You need to save. And so there's these very specific actions you need to take as you enter the workforce to be able to do more sooner. I just spent time with Hispanic Executive Magazine, and they were talking to me about my vision, my legacy, what do I aim to do? And I said, I aim to help that next generation do what I've been able to do in half the time. We think about all of our accomplishments that we've had privilege in terms of our success and our impact. If we could get that next generation to start even sooner, think about the impact we would have. And so that's my goal. But the demographic is growing, continues to grow. It fuels this economy. It's growing faster than other economies around the world. Ranked top 8, so ranked top 10 globally. And so you can't not pay attention to it. You can't not pay attention to it.
That's so true. So my next question for you is, do you feel that the challenges for Latinos and the Latino community are more cultural, institutional, or do you think they're more of a combination?
I think, you know, not just for Latinos, I think for all of us, your culture, your traditions all play a role into the decisions you make financially. And so your perception around money and saving and investing are going to all come into play. And if you didn't grow up in a home where there was active financial management or even discussions, because I think sometimes culturally we don't have the discussions. And so it's not until you find yourself in a position that you have to make those decisions that you start to understand you don't nearly know enough. And so we need to all own that. We need to own it individually. I tell Latinos, I tell women, I tell my 8-year-old daughter, you need to own it, and you need to start early in terms of, number one, having a positive relationship with wealth. As you acquire wealth, understanding that I always call it a trapped resource. It's how you take it and work it and then unleash it that could give you so much satisfaction. Because the goal is to become financially empowered so you have more choices. And then that leads you to have financial independence, to be able to do the things you care about. And I think that's amazing. And so I paint this picture of wealth being a resource that allows you to go after your passion, your purpose, the things you like to do. But it takes work and it takes investment up front, and anybody can do it. You don't need to grow up in the finance industry. In fact, as consumers, we owe it to ourselves to become, to embrace financial literacy so that we make those decisions in terms of home ownership versus renting. What percentage of the income you earn should you save? At what point do you start investing? And some of these very basic decisions that we can all make so that we can have a much stronger financial life, and that will lead to more choices.
That's so true. Which really leads me to my next question. Why is finance something important to be engaged with in general? And you kind of already alluded to that a bit, but I'd love to kind of dig in a little bit more if you can.
I call it empowerment by choice, which is, do you want to be able to choose where to eat out tonight? Do you want to be able to decide which job you want to take? Do you want to decide where you want to live in terms of a condo or a house? Do you want to have the option of deciding where to vacation next year? I mean, these are all the day-to-day choices that we have, or sometimes we don't have. And so I believe, you know, sometimes we think the income is what allows us to then start to play a role in more active financial management. And I believe, you know, again, I owe this to my father, but even as a student, when I was working in real estate, he said, you need to save. And every year he said, you have to put money into a retirement account. And we had those conversations. And he said, you may think, you know, 10% of your paycheck is a very small amount, but it adds up. And sure does, it does add up. And so it's about building the discipline and not waiting until you've acquired a certain level of income to start to take those steps. And it's little steps, it's small steps. You do not need a lot of resources, and you do not need a ton of knowledge. You just have to lean in. In Morgan Stanley, we have a money guide that's a very helpful and useful tool that talks about all of these life events and what are the steps to take to get going so that you can make a difference earlier on. The other thing is, I think we need to talk up money. I think, when we get together, I tell my girlfriends, we need to talk about, estate planning and how are we planning our assets, and how are we saving, and did we buy real estate? It's all of those conversations that start to get us more comfortable with wealth, more comfortable with the decisions we're making, and build networks that allow us to then scale our efforts as well. But it starts early. We need to start early. I can't stress that enough. And sometimes it's the students educating the parents. One of the things that drove me, my passion around real estate when I started working in real estate, is that we never owned a home. My mother had to move from house to house to house. I'll never forget that, and never was able to own a home. The first thing I did when I started working real estate was buy that first home where my mother could live. And so, home ownership is another big trend of Latinos in the US, because being comfortable with a hard asset is much more common and comfortable than a financial asset, i.e. managing money, investing money. And so we need to spend more time helping folks get comfortable with those aspects. But one of the ways we can do that is to just talk and make it more common to have those conversations. And so I try to bring those conversations to the table with my girlfriends, with students. I talk about it all the time. I could be in a conference discussing leadership, and I talk about leadership. Being a leader is also taking care of your finances. And what are the steps that you're taking to do that as a student? Even if you have to pay rent at home, even if, right, like I remember getting my $250 check every 2 weeks, and planning how I was going to spend that money, and just making sure you're being thoughtful about allocating, building the discipline and the muscle to be able to chip away at achieving those financial goals.
It's so true. My mom taught me that while I was in high school. I had a little job. She used to have me put a little money aside for rent. Little did I know it was actually for something else, to give me when I went to college, but it was more of a teaching act of like, this is how you do that. So that when I graduated, I knew how to pay rent and budget my life and think about where my money was going.
Budgeting. I'm so glad you brought that up. Budgeting is, it's like an X-ray view of what you're doing financially. And so it's an eye-opening exercise to go through to realize, where is my money going? And is it focused on the priorities that I have for myself? And you always find opportunities when you lay out your budget. And so here's your budget, here's your actual, and the two aren't always aligned. So it's good for your mom to have you do that, because it's a great way to have a foundation off of which to work from.
I agree. It makes such a big impact in life. So I have just a couple more questions. My next question would be, do you have any hopes or thoughts on the future of your role in the financial industry at large?
I always say, one of the privileges of being able to take on bigger roles and have broader impact and receive the recognition is that then you can continue to do more within the company, in my case, Morgan Stanley, and then also do more outside. So I recently joined the Girl Scouts National Board, and I think a lot about that work. And one of the reasons I decided to take on that opportunity is because, again, it's focused on girls. It's focused on this movement of empowering girls to do so much more earlier on. And I want to hone in on the financial literacy piece of it to help the girls acquire those skills. You know, it's the cookie business of the Girl Scouts. Wow, you know, the movement to get these girls to understand sales management and how to build a business model and take it on the road to drive revenue. And then you have those proceeds, and how do you invest? And how do you make those decisions in terms of your own business? But you get to do it at such a young age. And I think those experiences are so impactful to set the stage for what you're going to do later on in life. And so that opportunity, you know, came to me through my network and through all of the work that I do at Morgan Stanley. And so paying it forward and being able to do more, both within the company through my co-chair role of the Latino Employee Network, outside of the organization with the boards that I sit on, is a privilege. And it's all a result of this journey that I've been on, that I want to stay on, because we have the responsibility to pay it forward and be able to impact lives in scale, as I like to say, so we can make a bigger difference.
That's awesome. I love the Girl Scouts. I have a couple young ladies I buy from every year because they just great little pitch. And I was like, that's it. You got a customer for life.
That's awesome.
So my next question for you is, what career advice would you give your daughter or any young Latina woman in the finance industry or otherwise?
This gets to my mantra, which I've learned on my own, and now I try to pass it on, including to my daughter. So the first one is this whole notion of asking, you know, raising your hand for what you want, for sharing your vision. And so I teach my daughter a lot about how to negotiate, which usually ends up working against me because then she uses those strategies on me. And I want her to stop sometimes, but she goes back at it because I've taught her to do that. And it may sound silly, but even in the playground, I tell her to do that, right? It's, you know, you want the swing, you want your turn. And, you know, a lot of times we will instill in our kids culturally, you don't do that. It's not the right thing to do. You wait your turn. And so, you know, there's all this research between boys and girls and some of the standards that we set for each. And I, you know, when folks tell me, you know, girls do this or don't do this, I immediately clarify the point. You mean kids don't do this? Like, if kids shouldn't do this, I'm with you in terms of the teaching moment. But if it's just girls shouldn't do it, it's not a teaching moment, and we should just go in a different direction. But I talk to my daughter a lot about asking. So when she's shy, she doesn't want to lean in, she doesn't know the person, I will walk up with her, but having the courage and the confidence, which I think is so important. For girls, for students, I think that's really 80% of it, because when you believe that you can, you will lean in and you will go for it. My mom used to always say, el no ya lo tienes, which was, you know, I didn't want to get on the phone to make a call. I didn't want to, you know, ask for the donation to be able to go to my cheerleading competition when we used to go fundraising. All of these unique experiences where she would say, if you don't ask, you've got a 100% chance it's a no. If you ask, you have a 50% chance you're going to get a yes. So go for it. And so building that, again, that muscle to have the courage and the confidence to go for what you want, I think is incredibly important in any career, in any field. That's one. Number two, work ethic is just so important. Staying the course and being resilient to deliver results in anything you do has shown me is the best way to make your mark, especially early on in your career, which is whatever you do, even if you aspire to do 10 other things and you've got your vision on where you want to go next, deliver big in what you're doing now, because that's the way you're going to make your mark. You're going to build your reputation. Others are going to take notice. So you have to just do it. And sometimes it's a role that you wanted to do. Sometimes it's a role you're asked to do. But being laser focused on outcomes and results is incredibly important. And then the third is about relationships and networks. Just taking the time to build your network. In the case of a Latina, my case, making sure my network's not all Latina women, which we love to associate with folks that we know. But I will tell you, most of my sponsors and my networks are not made up of Latinos by design, because I've made a concerted effort to connect with very diverse talent and diverse individuals that have offered me incredible advice and sponsorship throughout my career. And so you need to be strategic, because again, I think the Latino culture is very much about a very strong work ethic. Keep your head down, work hard, everything else will follow suit. It's not enough. You have to work hard. You need to build relationships. You need to raise your hand and speak up for the assignments you want, and then say yes. You know, I've been very strategic on saying yes, even when I don't have all the answers. And again, sometimes we overanalyze situations. We're waiting until everything falls in place, and then we go for it. And by then it's too late. So you have to just go in knowing you've got 80% of it figured out, another 20% to learn, but it'll all sort itself out. And so that gets back to my original point on risk taking, which is go for it. Go for it, because the worst that'll happen is you learn something new, and you realize you are ready to take on the next chapter. That's it.
That's awesome. That is wonderful advice. I just wanted to thank you so much for spending your time with us. It has been phenomenal to learn so much about the financial industry, about the Latino community, about the Latina women community, and most importantly, about your role and your impact through Morgan Stanley and all the many things that you do outside of your, professional and day-to-day job.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to spend time with you, another fellow Latina, and just all the work that you do in Fully Vested. It's very inspirational, and it's just great to collaborate on opportunities like this to highlight what we're all doing collectively within the industry, outside of the industry, to continue to advance the Latino mission.